Okay. Okay. All right. Yeah. So, all right, folks. I don't know if we need to go through introductions. I think a couple of people are not, who think they're new. I think if they just want to introduce themselves a little bit, type thing would not be. It would be worth spending 5-10 minutes for it, type of thing. So anybody who wants to jump in and introduce themselves or say hello to the group, feel free to do so. I don't have the window of the participants open because I have my, cheat sheet open. So I think please jump in and, say a few words to say hi to the group if you choose to. Or if you don't want to, that's fine too.
I know everybody except Lorraine.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Lorraine.
Yes.
I've taken broad courses many times. I anticipate to enjoy this one also.
Okay.
And
All right.
I'm Peter. I'm a biochemist, sort of. Fancies himself as a doctor occasionally, and I'm a keen member of Barat's fan club.
It's interesting. In the list that I got, I don't have Lorraine's name. So anyway, so that's interesting. Yeah. But anyway, so I'll add it later. Okay. Yeah, because
Yeah, honestly, I pay.
no, I believe you, but no, that's not the point because I just have 11 people, so that's why I think like I think okay, I'll just read out type thing, Phyllis. Oh yeah, no, it is there. I'm sorry, my bad. Yeah. Oh, I just know you by your last name. That's why I was looking up. Okay, yeah, sure. Nice to see you. So, okay, all right. I think so. Everybody else, knows. I think so. We'll just move right along. That this is Bruce Gobioff made me more organized. So I said I should give outline of the class. So I promised not to stick to it. I will jump from one to the other. And I asked the two scholars in our group, Peter and John, how should I do? I should just do the history first or science first? He said, mix it up, because that way people don't get disgusted and leave, don't show up on the fourth day. So I think, so we'll try to mix things up a little bit. And this is the rough outline of the class, how the idea of the word race came about, and then the eugenics, which was the big, how the science gets mislaid and creates trouble. I had never thought I'd be criticizing science, but this was the biggest thing that history is worth rehearsing. Most of you know it, but I think just to put it in a proper perspective, it's worthwhile. And then obviously, the molecular biology is a big change that has occurred. And as a physician, as an applied science person, medicine and race, we have known about it for a long time, so to speak. And the new craze with the to just yesterday look up what DEI stands for. When they the Harvard president thing came about. What is DEI? So I was confusing it with DUI. Okay, but it's entirely different. So okay, and I think before we start, a disclaimer: no horses were harmed in the preparation of this class. Okay, so so the race, they were all safe. No animals were abused. Okay, now I think I can't see everybody's this thing, but I think what race are you? Quickly, what do you fill out on your census? Or if you ask a question just without thinking, what's the first thing that you would tell? Okay.
White for me.
Oh yes. Okay.
Scandinavian all the way.
Yes, exactly. So, and I don't know if John is signed in or not. John Hassel, if he's there, how
He's
be
there.
interesting. Yeah. So I wonder how he would want to answer that. John, how would you answer that?
Unmute, John.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, my dog was a little upset here, and I missed the question. What was the question?
I say, yeah, if just very quickly without thinking too much about it, just like a reflex thing. If somebody asked you, what race are you? How would you answer?
Human.
Hey, you get the prize. You can give the class in place of me. That is absolutely the answer I would prefer. And I was reading about, a big essay on, and we'll get to it in just a few minutes type of thing. And okay, now I have to, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think, Rep, now people, anybody want to address the cases? If you're Jewish, is that a race or religion?
Depends on if you're a Nazi or not.
Okay, yeah, it's a qualified answer. Yes, it's complicated. As our friend Rich would say, it is complicated. That's exactly right. I think so. And then I have about, right now I'm not going to go through the references type thing, but there is, in the end, there's a book written by a geneticist, and type thing. So the title of the book is "We Are All African." So we'll get to that in the end type of thing. So, and then again, it's like before so basically you're saying, but the race and this subject is extremely complicated because it incorporates so many disciplines of science, starting from anthropology, archaeology, so-called classical biology, Mendelian biology, as we would call it, molecular genetics, population genetics, statistics, sociology, behavioral science, economics, politics, philosophy. So it incorporates various disciplines, and some of them one can say they are hard sciences, some of them are so-called soft sciences, depending upon your belief, type of thing. So, okay. So, and since I'm not running for office, I'm not going to be afraid to mention the word slavery in this class, okay. And but so this is how it came about type of thing. So now this is, we can say, discrimination and us versus them is hardwired, and it's nice to start a class with a joke. And obviously this was the one that is probably you may have heard about it before, but it's like and you can read for it. It's mildly amusing and probably stereotypes, a lot of European nations. Okay, and now how did I get the idea for the class type of thing? Because I read a comic strip that somebody was sent me by a Malaysian comics a while back when Rishi Sunak became this thing, that his stand-up kit was, oh, he's Asian. And this man said, hey, get over it. He's not Asian. He's Indian. And that was the whole thing. So he goes on and on for about 10 minutes. It was a stand-up comic type of thing. So it's the whole thing. So that's when I started thinking about, says, excuse me, sorry, pardon me. Okay, as to how I became Asian, type of thing, that until I started applying for a visa, I never thought of myself as Asian type of thing, So, I mean, there are various ways, when I was 10 or 12 years old, I would have identified myself as, as Hindu based on religion. If you go to the classic Indian mythology of the two big epics, similar to Iliad and Odyssey, Ramayana and Mahabharata, okay, the princes and the kings at that time, the son of Arya, and that's the name Iran has got to do with Aryans before the Nazis, hijacked the concept, or Indian, and now we have to pretty the United Courts, because the case as to how to classify Indians came up against various appellate courts and other stuff about 12 times from what I came across. I was just aware of the one. And about 9 times out of 12, I'm sorry, 7 out of 12, they said, no, Indians are not Caucasians, 4 times they said, yes, they are, based on the old concept of race, which was prevalent between 1850 to until very recently, so to speak, And on one case, they said, we just can't tell. Okay, and it finally made it up to the famous Supreme Court case of Thind versus United States. Now, Thind was a Punjabi guy who has immigrated to California and had served in the U.S. Army during First World War. And based on the old racist concept, he says, oh, I'm about as Caucasian as you can. My ancestors were Sanskrit-speaking Aryans, so he went against that. And once he was given citizenship based on that argument, and then Supreme Court took it away from him, So that's the famous case for the, legal this thing. So at the same time, there was a Japanese gentleman who said, "I'm looking white," So that case went, I forget I don't remember his name, but he went all the way to Supreme Court. Said, "No, you look white, but you're not Caucasian." So it just, it was an amazing thing. So it has been confusing issue type of thing, and you can just see this is the last census form type of thing, and it's to see how they are trying to get data. This is basically data collection, and obviously that David Reich, who is a well-known geneticist and researcher at Harvard, and it's he's had a statement. Hispanic is it's a linguistic classification. It's not any type of ethnic classification, or because it's like Puerto Ricans. My neighbors are Puerto Ricans, and they're Italian ancestry. They don't have any Spanish ancestry, so type of thing. But they're still classified as Hispanic type thing. So, and even amongst the census, at one time, there was different confusion when the immigrants from Southern Europe and Central Europe started coming. The Northern Italians claimed, no, we are Nordic, while the Southern Sicilians were a hard time to classify. So it's a really mixed up case type of thing. So, okay. All right. So I think I'm sorry, I should have the chat lined up.
So Bharat,
Yes.
yeah, so Alan, you can't see the participants and Alan should be telling you somebody's out there. But here's the question I have for you. All these different definitions of race from all these places, is there an underlying analysis metric somewhere that this is all built on? Or is it all based on social recognition that there's nothing scientific? And I'm sure John would say there is no, from his standpoint, there is no scientific.
Yeah, it's like, we'll get to that. I think that's the whole thrust of the issue type of thing, exactly type of thing, as to because, that as to it gets down to this are a regional classification, as you can see from the name. Mexico is not a race, and neither is Cuban or this thing. So it's like these are regional classifications that people, various groups have agitated and have included type thing. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I may be wrong type thing, but Indians wanted to be classified as minorities type of thing. So they were, so that's it changed type of thing. So
how can they be a minority with 1+ billion people?
Yeah, no, I mean in United States, I mean in US type of thing. So it's like, because,
okay.
Yeah, right. I think, so they can get some of this thing. So it's like yes, that there are different ways of looking at it, and that's the thrust of the issue, because based on molecular biology classification, medical classification, as to whether this is a trait or it's not. Because if you obviously, John will confirm it, if we look at our genetic code or genome analysis, we are all, basically same, and within group diversity, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. So we may not get to it today, but we'll have a lot of things to say about it. So just please, I won't try to elaborate the point right now. So I think, okay, but and this is the thing that I put. Just a picture quiz. Who is this guy? Okay, anybody can unmute. This is Jawaharlal Nehru when he was young. Okay, our former prime minister. Who is this? Anybody identifies the face?
His daughter?
No, this is Benazir Bhutto.
Oh,
She's Pakistani. Yeah, so this is, So now, if you look at this, would you call them Asian? Because they live in the Asian continent. But, that's where the confusion arises type of thing as to how we classify people. Now, obviously, this is Chairman Mao, right? I don't think he needs identification. Okay. And clearly you would classify him as Asian. Okay. Who is this person? Anybody know?
former Prime Minister of Japan?
Right, yeah, he
Abe.
was the one who was killed. Yeah,
Yeah,
Shinzo
Abe.
Abe. He was, yeah, so obviously he would call Asian. So that way, the census thing, gets, as you say. Now, is this lady Australian, Indian? Now, she's the current ceremonial president of India. There is a ceremonial post type of thing. And her ancestry is Aborigine or tribal person from India. Okay. And so their genetic analysis would compare with the Aborigines of Australia. And she would have a lot more African ancestry at the first migration that took place along the, the Arabian Peninsula, and when humans got out of Africa, sorry, and started walking. And so this was the original people of the subcontinent, so to speak. So this is, and there were tribes, which were, really a thorn in the side, in the central India, there were tribes that they were a big thrust for the Brits. The East India Company actually, had a tough fight on them when the tribals held on to their rights. So that's, so just a little bit of history thrown in. So this is how the admixture goes along. Now, this is the newest edition of my extended family. This is my aunt's granddaughter. Okay. Now, based on the Indian laws, she could be classified as Indian because person of Indian ancestry. Okay. And if you don't believe that, this is her dad. Okay. So it just gives an example as to how the mixing. So we cannot rely on the skin colors, basically. So that's the point I wanted to make. Now, all of these people have relationship with genetics type of thing also. Okay, because Nehru's granddaughter, Indira Gandhi, tried to do eugenics by doing forced sterilization in 1974. And they forcefully, because they wanted to reduce population, and they forcefully sterilized, I think, several million people. And that was one of the reasons. And needless to say, when she removed emergency and went for elections, she was thrown out by the people. So that was the thing about how it ties in with eugenics or so-called negative eugenics effort. Pakistanis have a lot of consanguineous marriages. Okay, so they have the highest incidence of recessive diseases. In fact, the UK has a big problem because they marry amongst the cousins type of thing. And the Chinese, obviously, we know what they are doing in, to the Uyghur population. Okay, and the Japanese, have this thing. So we're, they consider themselves as totally different than Asians, so to speak. Like even so, it's so that Japanese stomachs are different because we cannot import rice. They wanted to protect their farmers. So and it's really so all these nation states and their xenophobia or their own quirks have had rules. And obviously what the Chinese did in Tibet, that is well known. So how it goes down with the ethnic cleansing type of thing. So okay. And again, just to say that how the implicit bias, is ingrained in various races type of thing. That okay. And when I was growing up, there used to be matrimonial ads in times of India, and they would not say prefer light skin, but they would say every bride was fair and had a wheatish complexion. So it was just the implicit bias that was there, in a very caste-based and class-based society type of thing. So that's just one of the things that I grew up with type of thing, so to speak. So and this is just the thing. Few months ago, I think in October, to say, New York Times had a whole graphic things on the U.S. Census, how it went down. So I mean, just for the sake of time, I put in a link. So if you want to see how the census went from a different thing, so they go every decade, as to how the census form has changed, type of thing. So it's a very interesting thing. And I just clipped one area about it as to how the African American classification in U.S. Census went on from putting guys as slaves to free colored persons to all the way to African Americans. How the wording has changed dramatically, type of thing. And And obviously, this is, I think, it's interesting to see the word like quadroons and octoroons. And obviously, the Mexicans and the Brazilians have a whole care of it. There were like, I think I may have a slide later on about there are 8 separate classifications that are there that are given for, for the same people type thing, depending upon what your ancestry was type of thing. So 1790 separated the white from the other people. Color was added in 1850. The word mulatto was added in 1870. Category of Chinese was added in 1890. And the other words, quadroon and octoroon were added. Okay. Mexican was added in 1930, but was removed in 40. Okay. And then after 70, they just threw up their hand. You can choose whatever you want. They don't care as long as they get the data type of thing. So, okay. So that's how it came about. And this was an interesting thing about the fraternal twins. This was a very rare case, that made the head of the National Geographic, twin, non-identical or fraternal twin as a result of mother releasing 2 eggs at the same time, both of which were fertilized by 2 different sperm. As a result, the embryos shared 50% of same DNA with each other, making them more alike than any other sibling. Okay, so and so this is, so it was an interesting, biological accident type of thing. So, okay, and so it was a very, eye-opening case type thing. And just to make sure that John doesn't get mad at me, I put in the slide so you can just explain. And this is the classic side of chromosomes, which were, been found because they were, so these are the male and female X, the male, obviously, most of you know, I mean, I'm not going to, but males are X and Y, females are 2X copies. So that's why it's the recessive and inheritance patterns comes around, type thing. So, okay, but, we'll get this is not a genetics class, so we are not going to get too much into it. And obviously, there are, just to make sure that women will think this is funny, and I'm sure some guys will do. I mean, a loss of a tiny piece of DNA can turn a perfectly good human into a man. Okay, so that, I think that may get you, get a chuckle out of it, type thing. So, and now this, I think, at the risk of getting John upset, DNA is not a destiny, and all of you, I mean, and there's a whole book, which I read. I'm not sure that the guy who wrote it is a psychologist or a biologist, I'm not sure type of thing. And obviously we have the classic movie, Gattaca, which was in 1997, I think it came out. Remember how, the discrimination based on your genetic code, that one of the nice thing that Bush II did was to ban against genetic discrimination, which was saying, so it is the big, this thing that with everybody getting their analysis, that the privacy and ethical issues, and our friend Ron Hammerly is doing a class on that type of thing. And I think he's doing a 2-session class, just to put in a plug for him, which he'll address this as to how determinism and medically assisted suicide based on your thing. So and I'm sure that would be equally interesting. Okay, so this is what. Now, this is one thing I thought. I mean, some of the thing that I think about is when I'm running. Okay, like a DNA is like a man. Women do all the work, but men take all the credit in any company a lot of times. Okay, and so DNA is sort of stubborn. Okay, it refuses to change or mutate, sits inside the nucleus and gives orders. It's the RNA that does all the work, Now, and it makes the proteins, which are the, workhorse of everything that makes you who you are, type of thing. And, there are, again, a word or two about mutation or change. And, it's like most of the time it's harmless, okay. And it can be, harmful or deleterious, and it can be beneficial as well, type of thing. So, and so there are various types of inheritance patterns that we'll go into. I have a slide for Mendelian genetics type of thing. But again, our environment is huge influence type of thing. And the classic example would be North Koreans and South Koreans. They're similar, ancestry, but South Koreans are at least 2 inches taller because they have better nutrition. The same way, in Africa, like you can see that, the Bantus are a lot shorter versus the Maasai, okay, who are the animal herders and have a better nutrition. So even within the continent, there could be a dramatic, a change in their physical appearance. I think, and I have various other nice graphics about it. And the same way in the subcontinent of India, there's a huge difference between the North and South Indians. And with the recent uproar of the Hindu majority government, there was a big this thing. So people when David Reich and other Indian geneticists did the research, they had to be politically correct, and instead of saying so, so this so-called Aryan ancestry versus Dravidian, which was the original southern group of languages, that to make it politically correct statement, ancestral North Indians, ancestral South Indians. So how politics and science gets intertwined all over the world, that is important, I think. Now, this was an interesting, obviously, all of us know this, e pluribus unum. During the G20 conference, Narendra Modi promoted this, which is the classic statement from Sanskrit and Hindu literature, was Vasudhaiva Kutumbam, the world is a family, the type of thing. Okay, and so out of many to one, and the whole world is a family. So these are two obviously noble ideas that were promoted, type of thing. Okay, but again, as science can be very political and similar to other change like climate, evolution, abortion, and race is no exception. Now, a lot of scientific theories, can be, by definition of Kurt Gödel, they have to be falsifiable, and that was the biggest problem that we ran into with the racial classification that was done, type thing. Now, with the rise of molecular biology, DNA has become like a common zeitgeist word. It is used in various commercial, like a GMC truck right now, it's called HDNA, or the Sony television uses the DNA in this thing. So DNA is the catchphrase for a man in the street would know the word DNA, type of thing. But at the same time, we are evolutionary bias with appearance, and of face recognition is hardwired in our, brain, so to speak. So that influences a lot as to how we interpret us versus them. Okay. Okay, and these are the various skin tones around the world, as you can see how to compare to North versus South, and similarly inside Africa alone, you'll find different skin tones. So that alone is, and it's a totally different view than what your complete genome analysis would indicate. But unfortunately, we can't see DNA with our naked eye. Not all of us go around, and when we give our identification card, we don't hand out the copies of our exome analysis, on a USB key and compare this, so to speak. So we don't go around doing that. So obviously, the first impression is that a man in the street forms. It's hard to get over. Okay, and this is, the us against them. It's hardwired in our brain. I don't know if I will play. I will try to see if this plays. Okay, most of you remember this. For the sake of time, it's a 1.5-minute clip from the beginning of the classic movie 2001 and Space Odyssey. Sorry, before I clicked, I wanted to put a disclaimer. This was not a clip from Gaza, okay? But this goes back to ancestrally, we're evolutionarily linked to our cousins, chimps. So this was the scene. So we're hardwired as social animals. Okay, and so think about it, that for most of the evolutionary history, we basically lived in extended family, basically 5 to 8 individuals. It changed within last 50,000 years, so to speak, or even less, 20,000 years, or maybe even less since the rise of agriculture. We started living in larger cities, and the idea of cities formed even more recently. So if we imagine human evolution is compressed within 24 hours, we are living with strangers, surrounded by strangers within last 5 minutes. Okay, all right. So that tells you that when we compare the DNA, we're very minuscule differences between uh, chimpanzees and us. Obviously, it's that difference is significant, in terms of our brain, our bipedalism and brain development, etc. But the us versus them is really hardwired into us based on our neurobiology. And my favorite neurobiologist, Dr. Sapolsky, which I may have talked about in my other classes, has an excellent big thing link, which I think this is it, probably the link that is there, as to he talks about, and I've summarized it basically that this is when we have people in our group, we have sympathy type of thing, usually we develop empathy. We see somebody, stamping on our foot or getting hurt, we have sympathized with them, we are hardwired with them. But and because our body releases oxytocin, and we sympathize with them, empathy, we are hardwired. Steven Pinker has written a lot about it, I think the better angels of our nature, so to speak. Okay, now this may come as a surprise to you. A study was done. Obviously, most of you know about the classic trolley problem in psychology, that a runaway train where where you're supposed to do active, say, one person versus 5 people. If you are supposed to throw the switch as to who would you save, 1 or 5. On the other hand, if you have to push a fat guy on the railroad track to save 5 people, as to how you would react. Okay, as to active versus passive involvement. This is the so-called classic trolley problem. I won't show a clip type of thing, but that's a classic psychology problem. And so this was done in Holland, and they showed this problem to various Dutch grad students, and then they did a placebo-controlled study by squirting a little liquid in their nose. Half got oxytocin, which is so-called love hormones, which moms get when they're pregnant, and that's how they start bonding with their babies. But and half they did not. Now, shocking finding was that people were sympathetic or were trying to save somebody with a Dutch sounding name. But if you gave them an Islamic name, their reaction was totally different. Or if you gave them even a German name, their reaction was different. So us versus them is hardwired to a tribal uh, thinking that has evolved. So love hormone, so-called, only works for us, and that was shocking to me, type of thing, as to how. Okay, so this sort of bias, that we have versus, in terms of age, gender, face, and so this is very culture specific or ethnic specific. The same video talks about computer generated images that were done between Japanese and Israelis. Okay, well, the face gradually morphed from a Japanese person to an Israeli person. And obviously, as the face changed, you were more sympathetic to the face belonging to your own tribe versus the other tribe. And so this is, and it was interesting thing as to how and part of that is, obviously, we did a class on neuroscience as to how, as human beings, we are very visual creatures. Okay, the part of the brain that is controlled by vision. It's a huge area compared to, that's why we rely on eyewitness versus hearsay. Okay, type thing. So evolutionary. So when you look at the neurobiology of your brain, okay, unfortunately our friend Alex Lerner is not here, but or so that would be this thing about the limbic system and oxytocin, and so those are a lot of evolutionary hardwiring that has occurred over millions of years, and that would be very hard to overcome just by being intellectually analyzing or knowing that yes, and our genetic code, we are all identical. So it would be, and again, this morning, a Washington Post has an article about the certain genes that are making us predisposed to multiple sclerosis. There's a huge, a long article about, and those genes are preserved because they may have given protection against some infections. So, and that is mostly common in Northern Europe, as most of you know. Multiple sclerosis is much more common in Northern European ancestry. So we can say that how we're not only connected with our tribes, but also with certain parasites, but influence our evolutionary this thing. And obviously, the next example, which make it apparent, we'll talk about how we are not only connected evolutionary with other humans, okay, and our tribes, but also with parasites, or agricultural things, the diseases that we caught from animals, type of thing, parasites, and obviously the classic examples, which we'll get to in a minute, it would be malaria, that thing. So, and recently, I think we did a class on microbes as to how your gut microbes would influence your behavior and how your genes would interact, type of thing. And Ed Yonk, who did a book about the microbes in us, I contain multitude. So, so you don't not just have 20,000 genes, but you have another, thousands of genes, which are your gut microbes that influence your behavior. Okay, so this is, and again, the tribalism is not just this thing, but it narrows down to even the narrowest this thing as to, like, so obviously we talked about empathy that develops, then the other feeling that you would show would be apathy. Okay, and then, but the more, if this thing would be the German word, which I would mispronounce always, Schadenfreude, okay, and which is like saying, oh yeah, I mean, those are the bad guys, so we hate them, like Yankees versus Red Sox. Okay, so when the Red Sox lose, the Yankee fans will cheer, not just because they're playing the Yankees, but even if they lose to Orioles. Okay, totally unrelated team. Oh yeah, I'm glad those guys lost. Okay, type of thing. So we're sort of hardwired type of thing to hate the others who are not part of our tribe. Now this crosses the boundaries, on a regular day, a Boston Irish may dislike a black person, okay, but if he's a Red Sox fan, yep, he's part of our tribe. So it's an interesting way how prejudice and other things, goes along, okay, and this goes along with the early, people who studied the hunter-gatherer tribes in Papua New Guinea, that initially the strangers they were enemies, either we kill them or otherwise they'll steal our women. Okay, so, but finally with the onset of agriculture thing, it was their need to share food and establish cooperation. So that was the development of societies. But again, as you remember evolutionary, those were small societies. It's only recently that, that we have the big, this thing where we're exposed to a lot of other faces, like sitting on a New York City subway. Okay. On the other hand, I mean, I can just swear for myself. Until I entered the United States, I had never seen a black person of African ancestry living in a provincial town in India. Okay. I mean, I've seen a lot of dark-skinned South Indian people, and and Caucasians, or usually English or Americans who will be traveling, but I had never seen a black person, so to speak. And so it was so it was an interesting thing as to how provincial we can be. And that wasn't too far ago. It was only 50 years ago, type of thing. Okay. And as somebody from outside, shocked me when we used to talk with the medical students in Kentucky. They say, Dr. Path, I've never been outside Kentucky, And I had this wrong impression. Oh yeah, all Americans would have been towered, Mean you've never been to New York? Nope. Okay, so it was an interesting how provincial we can be and prejudiced. And at the same time, we like to mix it up, as we very well know as to how many percent of, like the interracial mixing, in spite of the laws against it, has been. Okay, so we went through that. So a race, so out of Africa is our genetically proven based on the DNA analysis, anthropology, paleontology, and obviously with the classic work of paleontology and and this was Lucy, our ancestor, how many millions of years ago, okay, and this was the skeleton, okay. Now underneath, now you look at, we are closely related to chimpanzees, based on the paleontology and fossil deduction. So even before DNA analysis came around, that was apparent with the excavation that was done, in East Africa. Okay. Now underneath the chimp skin is pale and hairy, and obviously with the onset of bipedalism, we lost our hair. Okay, and that was a beneficial effect, obviously. Okay, otherwise it wouldn't have survived. I know. And again, when we look at Lucy, legs were relatively short legs and not a good runner, okay, type of thing. So, okay, and so that went along, and so, and then later on, with the further evolution, we see there's a dramatic change in the so-called Turkana boy that took place, okay, and this was Lucy earlier, and with the next skeleton, which was Kurt, which is the so-called Turkana boy, where the limbs became longer and we became good runners, and at the same time, we lost the hair and acquired the running abilities. So humans in groups can chase down an impala. Okay, and I think I did a class that few of you attended on human evolution, type of thing. And we'll put in a plug for John. He's going to do a class on human evolution probably in summer, I think, John. Okay, so that would be something that I'm sure he'll go into it in a lot more details than I am in this few minutes. Okay, so this is okay. Now, so race is out of Africa, and there's actually a book called "Race is a Four-Letter Word," and that depends upon who you talk to, and you'll find out as to whether you're talking to a biologist, a geneticist, okay, or we're talking to a sociologist, psychologist, type of thing, and so you'll find different words on it, type of thing, and okay, this is just to go over this in a little bit more details, the more recent views on evolutionary relationship between hominids, okay, the great apes and humans, okay. You can see the Sumatran gorillas, okay, the African, West and East African gorillas versus Pan, which is the apes. And this is, you can see the bonobos and chimpanzees. And now, some of you may know this. Unfortunately, we are more related to chimps than to bonobos. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had all these wars. Bonobos are totally, kind of, like a hippie type thing. So that's a totally different this thing. But unfortunately, we are more closely related to the chimps, as you can see in this slide, type of thing. And so we are, the chimps would, are very tribal, and they would kill the babies and just for tribes. And so they can be vicious given a chance, type of thing. On most of the time they're not, but so this is so we are a relatively young species, type of thing. And I think, I don't know if I mentioned this, this is a recent finding from 31st August. This was well known, type of thing, but a new genomic analysis that we nearly did not make it. Okay, that more recent genetic data shows survived as a group of only 1,280 people. So that may not surprise you that we are all related one way or the other. If you go far enough, we'll find out. And so much so that people who do the DNA analysis on your maternal link, that is the so-called mitochondrial DNA, which you can only inherit from your mom. Okay, so there was a book, I should say about almost 15, 20 years ago now, called Seven Daughters of Eve. So there is a lot more relationship. That's a relatively small amount, okay, small amount of genes inside a mitochondria. I think it's about like only 1,200 or 1,500 or something. And so they are very interconnected type of thing. So that wouldn't surprise you. We are all related to King Charles or to Genghis Khan in one way or the other. So you just have to go back far enough to find out. But that was shocking that only 1,280 people made it across. But then afterward, they really dispersed and exponentially expanded, to up to 8 billions now. Okay, all right. Okay, I will stop for a few seconds and take a breather. If anybody has any questions, comment, please jump in before I continue. Okay, all right, in the chat. Yeah, I'm sorry. We could, it's too late to correct that, Kevin. Kevin's comment was, I'm related to John and Bharat. Okay, all right, yes, okay. Okay, well, you have to blame your ancestor.
What's the limitation, Bharat, for a population that is too inbred to be viable? Because we worry about this often with animals that are going extinct, that they're so incredibly inbred that they're really not a viable species anymore.
This is, I will jump into that somehow this again, I think it may be, I would love to see what you guys think, but I was reading listening to a talk on science, and a group of biologists, or they spent 10 years on Galapagos Island observing Darwin's finches. Okay, and this, I mean, you have to admire their patience. Every year they would go and tabulate these finches, tag them, and try to keep track of them. And for almost 10 years, nothing happened. But then in 10th year, they saw development of a new species. This is, and now 10 years is just like microsecond in terms of evolutionary. And this was a paper that I just read recently. These were respectable things. This was, like the principal investigator is a Princeton guy and his grad student, so this is how, like, it's just the points of the talk was how tedious science can be and how one has to stick to it, like classical Edward O. Wilson is a good example. I mean, can spend 40 years studying this thing. So these people studied the finches and the development of a new species. So evolution is, to me, is, I think John may disagree, but it's really complicated, and I don't think we understand it as well. So, and when you talk about I've read some stuff on the inbreeding on the Pakistani families, they have this thing. But again, if they have enough kids, then they can get away with it. Okay, I mean, a lot of the pushback in Brist and from the Pakistani Brit community was, oh yeah, we have 5 children, 4 of them are okay. So they, so a lot of times, nature was much more forgiving than we realized. So the chances are, of extinction are probably smaller type things. So, and as we talked about in the history of medicine class, it's like we follow the evolutionary cliff type of thing. So the bad mutations, they may harm you later on because of lifestyle as a cancer, but by that time you've already had enough kids. So, so that was the thing that, if your memory, is better than mine, you remember we talked about Randolph Nesse, who has talked about falling of the evolutionary cliff and the origin of cancer type of thing, as to how, yes, the harmful mutations. And you and I read that book about the cancer cell, type of thing, so that the bad mutations are not that, they're harmed at a later on stage. And that just had floored me as to see how many mutations can be that. when they did biopsies of the gastroesophageal junction. And the place was full of mutations, but they didn't all go on to develop malignancy. So perhaps, biology is more forgiving than we give it credit for. Okay, enough pontificating on that. And I think if we have counterpoint, please go ahead and speak up, before I mumble on. Okay, so this was another thing. So I think, I'm taking more time, but this is, like, after all that I'm trying to stick to the class, this is science and this thing. And this is again, in a more graphic way, the whole evolutionary, this thing that you can, and this was Lucy, historically discovered in Ethiopia, long ago, small brain, 3.2 million years ago, type thing. And now goes back to further that after societies were established, the prejudice, that goes back to the classic, the Western heritage type of thing. Okay, and according to the Greeks, the others they were not discriminated based on the race, based on their language. They were called barbarians. Okay, the Persians, their language was hard to interpret, so they were called barbarians. Now the different thing was, that the Aristotle, said, yeah, it was okay to have slaves. There was nothing wrong with that. Greeks were totally okay in entitling. On the other hand, so there was a role for selective breeding. Okay, the inferior should be sent to. So I don't think he was quite democratic in that day, the great Plato and the Republic. So I have some references on that somewhere type thing, but I think we don't want to bore too much with philosophy type thing. So, okay, so there was a big discrimination between Greeks versus non-Greeks. So everybody else was just the undesirable class or barbarians type of thing. And so there was a big this thing to, it was very proper for Greeks to rule non-Greeks and having slaves, so non-Greeks and slaves were basically same. Now the Romans had a different viewpoint. You could become a Roman, but never become a Greek, so it's just like, I read somewhere, you could be born in France, but you could never be French, so to speak. So, and that, so that way, I don't know, and maybe at the risk of upsetting the Brits in the class, you could be born in Britain, but you're never really truly British type of thing. And I think I had a slide of, which I think I may have it later on some of the slides, the so-called Euro whiteness. And the guy who wrote it is interesting. He has a South Indian father, a Dutch mother, and he grew up in Britain. And it's obviously very confusing for him how to classify himself. Am I European? Am I British? Am I Indian? Okay, type thing. So it's, and he had written a book about how, the Euro whiteness still influences the politics of EU and Britain, so to speak. So, okay. And obviously slave trade was not just discovered by, by the Yankees and the Southerners, it goes back, to Greeks, Romans, and Arabs. Arabs, were there in the 7th and 8th century, way before Portuguese went around, tried to make towards the coast of Africa. So it was, it was an old this thing, and during the Phoenician thing, that there was a lot of slave trading of men and obviously of women, so that just went around for a long time type of thing, way before. So so the roots of slavery are, and this again, surprising that there were African slaves were imported not just to the New World, but were also brought in by the Portuguese to the Indian subcontinent, and in the area between, from Bombay and Pakistan, there were a lot of princely states, and they still have people who were brought in as slaves, to the Nawabs and Sultans of India. Okay, and they've lived there, so, and they can be, their ancestry is still, they dress and speak Indian languages, but their roots are purely African. So the slave trade has long roots, and there was enough of a slave trade goes that went along south of the equator. The Malays were brought in as slaves, were pressed into slavery by the Portuguese and the Spaniards who were making trips in the southern hemisphere. Okay, so and the Venetians were beginning to enter slave trade from Eastern Europe, and that was the name of the Slav people were traded from Eastern Europe and were sold. Okay, so this is again, this in more details, the example type thing. Let's see if I can. Okay, and this was the more detail since the availability of the Neanderthal and Denisovan genes, which are the tribes which were before, they've gone extinct now. And so this is the more recent genetic classification: African, non-African, and then the other branches that filtered out. There were some other species that we, that like a Homo naledi that was described in South Africa recently. So these are some of the just, and this is even more interesting as to how much migration took place within Africa alone. We can just see from the confusing arrows that took place, the so-called Bantu expansion out of Africa migration that took place later on, the trans-Saharan population migration. You can just see how complicated the human, so, and again, this was a relatively, some of you may not be aware as to how after crossing Africa, we didn't just stay. There was some back migration. Okay, so you can just see as to how, some of the gene transfer may have taken place, this thing. And so these are the varieties of complicated routes that took place, type thing. So within Africa, there's a lot more diversity. And as I mentioned earlier, the biggest description was the earlier concept of others was not based on skin color, but on linguistic classification type of thing. Okay, and at the same time, obviously, again, other barbarians were the Goths and the Huns, and took place. So the races came from. So one can say safely that this sort of discrimination came into existence because of the scientific thought or the reductionist policy started out by perhaps some well-meaning, but ultimately misguided anthropologists, starting with the father of racial classification, Carl Linnaeus, we'll talk about in just a few minutes, type of thing. Okay, and and make one point before we take a break, type of things, that the earlier migration, the theories of the skin appearance was based on climatic changes. That was the earlier.
We may have lost Bharat for a while. One of the things that he's having problems with is his computer that will freeze up, and he needs to reboot the whole thing. So let's hang in here for a moment and see if he can get that done. Or given the group is pretty well known to one another, this might be a good time to unmute and talk about anything that comes up for you in relation to what Bharat was speaking about.
Well, I like Peter's question about what's the minimum number of organisms you need of one race in order to survive. That's kind of interesting from a standpoint of how much money do you have. So those Arabian horses that are used in races are all derived from just a couple of horses, and they're very inbred. And they're actually very sick animals, and they're very fragile. That's why they're having to put them down all the time. But there's a lot of money in it, and people like to raise horses. So that inbred strain is maintained mainly because of money, I think. There's also some inbred animals that are made just for that purpose. So they are essentially a homogeneous population of animals. There's a Jackson Laboratories made an inbred mouse strain that was called the Jack's mouse that was very homogeneous. So it's all about money.
Interesting questions, John. You wonder if the number, instead of 1280, if it had been 12,800 that we reduced to, how the human race would have evolved differently. Would it have been higher intelligence? Would it have more diversity? What would have been the result? And I'm always struck by the adoptions that particularly Americans do, I suppose the Western Europeans do, is they really concentrate on a few countries to adopt kids from. And what does that do to the long-term mixing of different ethnic and backgrounds of color? I don't know.
Yeah, that's also been said that there's more people with red hair in our population than there should be. Based
I'm
on,
leaving soon, John, so.
okay, well, not and it's suggested that they went through some sort of crisis where red people with red hair were selected for, and so they became a larger basis of the genetics of humans, and that's why there's so many people with that have red hair today. So you've been selected for, Kevin.
Yeah, red-haired, left-handed, I get all the strikes against me.
I'm watching participants, and Barat hasn't come back yet. We've got waiting room turned off, so he will just come in as soon as his computer gets rebooted.
Al, why not? Barat was about to start a break, so why don't we just take a 10-minute break and wait and give him some time to get back?
That makes sense to me. Yeah, go ahead, and I'll wait here for him when he comes back in and let him know. So it's 11:02, so 11:12. We'll start over again.
Sounds good to me.
Okay.
For those listening in, I'm always much amused based on the movement of humans over the eons, that the only true humans are actually sub-Saharan Africans, which I can imagine not going down too well with large blocks of the white population.
Okay, now Barat is okay. Barat
Yeah,
back.
I'm back. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Did you have to reboot?
Yeah, unfortunately, yes. Yeah. I think I will. What I'll do is next time I will log on my laptop as a primary, so I don't get kicked out. Okay. So I think I should be sharing this. I should be on the same slide that we were on earlier.
Okay, so hang on a second, Barat. While you were gone, Kevin suggested, and we agreed by acclamation, that this would be a good time for a break because you were about to give us one, and
absolutely,
so,
I'm sorry. That's what I was thinking about. So that's
Yeah.
why I said I'll be back in 5 minutes or so.
So at the moment, you can coast until about 11:12, and at that point,
Okay, all
anybody
right.
who isn't here is back. And
Yeah.
now we've got 13 people here now, although obviously some of them could be stepping away. So yeah, let's let it go until 11:10.
Oh yeah, I'll get a sip of water, and then I'll be back. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
All right, so I think we talked about how the discrimination was there type thing, So there was the climactic theories type of thing. And then again, there was, like eugenics was practiced, this was not a new thing. You look at the Spartans, I mean, they were not exactly the nicest to their own people type of thing. So this is, and there was some infanticide. Now this shocked me about the Iceland type of thing. 1,000-year current area precondition before accepting Christianity. So, okay, I mean, if they want to get rid of the kids who are not going to make it, type of thing. So, and again, we're not averse to it. I mean, this is one of the worst thing that, in spite of the laws, in India, there is a lot of selective abortion because everybody wants a male heir apparent, everybody wants a Prince Charles rather than the Queen, so that is, it was, and no, it's banned, but I'm sure it goes on under the table type thing. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to type exclamation. It was 1,000. Okay, so this is, okay, and now this is, this somebody, who is the rock fan would remember these are the lyrics from Pink Floyd, type thing, us versus them, type thing. So there was we are only ordinary men, me and you, God only knows it's not what we choose to do. Forward, he cries from the rear, and front rank died. The general sat, and the lines on the map moved side to side, which way up and down. So this was a classic rock song for, I think, okay, for those of you who grew up with this thing. So I already alluded to type of thing that we are relatively new type of thing. We're a very young species, when we time. So no wonder we are not used to living with others. And this is a book that I just stumbled upon recently, and I finished it. This is written by a psychologist. His name is George Macari, and he's a Lebanese. He's a third generation Lebanese Christian. So again, he has the same dilemma that the chap who wrote Euro Whiteness has. How do I classify? Am I an Arab? Am I white? Am I this thing? So it's just so. And he has written this thing about the fear of strangers. The word xeno, was actually not just about foreigners or others. It was about strangers, and the strangers could be, gods pretending to be strangers type thing, because the Greeks had many gods. So the word xenos had a different connotation in the earlier thing. So you cannot just be bad, so there was a class about hospitality, and the tradition what was not just in the Greek, but when we talk about in Afghanistan, there's a word called, a Pushtun Wali. So it means the code of the ethics. Any stranger who walks in, obviously you're, got to treat them with hospitality type of thing. So that was a different meaning of the words, type thing. And then the word phobia that entered much later, around, in the 18th century as type of thing. So this was the thing about it. He talks about xenophobia can take multiple forms. Obviously it could be racial, it could be fear of immigrants, it could be fear of anybody who is foreign. I mean, you could like classic Hercule Poirot, okay, and obviously all the Brits. Oh, little foreign gentleman, okay. I mean, his talent is respected, but after all, he's a Belgian, okay, and and obviously, like fear, So there is a, in the, and I think Peter would remember this very well, type thinking about why should the Brits buy the nuclear submarine from the United States, us versus them. French, why not? Aren't they our allies? Well, now, but we have been fighting them for 1,000 years. So Anglophobia and Francophobia, that's been around for a long time, so to speak. So it's hardwired, and it's been going for thousands of years type of thing. So, okay, so everybody, has, like, and the idea of nation state incorporates very well into it. Imperialism has a long root type of thing. During the Boxer Rebellion, all the Western nations, that, it's this crazy Chinese empire. They would think they just don't want our civilization that we're giving them, they're xenophobic, the Chinese said this thing, we are self-contained. China doesn't need anything from anybody else. So and the same way the Japanese, I mean, Admiral Perry had to force them to open up, so to speak. So that's where the xenophobia word came about, type of thing. And again, we talk about the word genocide, and I think that, does anybody know how the word genocide came about? Okay, I think that the word was coined after the Holocaust by a Jewish immigrant who was a duke. That's where he coined up with the word genocide type thing. And the definition was accepted by the United Nations of the genocide. And this morning's New York Times, if you read it, there's a whole slew of things about the case of South Africa versus Israel. and the pros and cons of argument that if you're interested, just look at this morning's New York Times about. But that's the word he came up with, that this was such an unparalleled event in the history of humanity that it needed obviously a new word for it to wipe out a whole community or tribe or type of thing. So that's what the word genocide was coined, type thing. So, and this was a nice article in this book by George McCarry, I think so. And again, when we talk about it, that the history is complicated type of thing. Concentration camps were not just invented by the Nazis, the Brits had them during the Boer War, okay, type thing, and they had them in Kenya type of thing. So it was one of those things that it was not a new thing. Genocide, again, there is a precedent for it. The Germans learned their lessons in West Africa or Namibia, that the German general who, his name, I have it written down, General Lothar von Trotha, okay, and he was, he totally wiped out the Native African tribes. There was a tribe called Hararo and Nami, and obviously, they had not signed up the Red Cross Declaration, so the Hararos, during the tribal warfare when they rose against the German occupiers, they were headhunters, and they were not exact the same way violence that went on during the Afghan war. That's why you remember the talk that I did about Afghanistan, as to how if you're captured in Afghanistan, just shoot yourself, otherwise the Afghan women will cut off your privates when you're lying wounded, and they'll pee in your mouth. Okay, so they were not exactly signed up to the Geneva Convention. So that's one of the reasons why the Germans, that thing, and the same, hatred and genocide, after the 1857 rebellion. Even Charles Dickens was, when the Indian mutineers did the massacre of British women and children type thing. So they just wanted revenge. The xenophobia, took a variety of things from, this thing. So there's a lot of history type thing. So, and the xenophobia led to a ban against interracial marriage type thing. And obviously, so that was one way to keep the races separate from us versus them. And even that xenophobia transgraded even to the movies, okay, that in 1930, when the Hayes Act was passed, interracial love was banned. So that is a no-no in Hollywood, okay. And so it took time, it continued. I think those of you remember the earlier shows, Dick Van Dyke Show, they were well controlled. So, and this is one of the cartoons for xenophobia. Let's see if I can zoom in on that. Yes, this is, American labor, okay. All this foreign element, immigrant revolution and industrial revolution combination, foundation of American wages and prosperity. So this was the cartoon that was there from that time when the so-called undesirable started coming along. Now, again, xenophobia takes a varieties of forms, okay. So this was, in the early days of United States, okay, and this was a sign from the modern day Israel. Die, Arab sand niggers, okay, and 1/3 of the Israeli youth. Okay, this is a Wikipedia code type of thing. So obviously, those are usually, so 1/3 of the Israeli teenagers think Arabs are less intelligent and inferior. Okay, again, they're all Semitic people. They share ancestry, but the hatred takes many forms. So that's one way to know. So this was really, it was written more from a psychology point of view, but it's a very well-respected work. And for those of you who are more interested, he talks with a linguistic scholar, who is a Nigerian Brit named Atia Apaya. So there's a nice talk about xenophobia. So those who are interested, I should be happy to share with it. And this is, again, it's a very fluid concept. It's not a black and white, or, Jewish and Christian, or Asian versus or Chinese versus white fish. It's a fluid concept with the intermixing type of thing. So it's a gradient that one would want to emphasize, not just a clear-cut issue type of thing. So, and so you can say, and then the word entered English language probably around 1580. So before that, the origin takes down to Old French, the word called Italian and razza, R-A-Z-Z-A type thing. So that was, that was the origin of the concept that started out, and obviously, so that just, and so these are some of the thoughts. This is a nice talk by a Kenyan geneticist, that was done at Case Western. So that's a link to that. And he, this is his slide, that how it's a fluid concept, which we understand based on, and he's a, molecular geneticist, I think so. So you hear a nice Kenyan British accent, that thing. So it's a very fluid concept, and it's not as clear cut, wet, Now this was a test done by a Dr. White, with various dolls as to how implicit bias is this thing. So he took children who grew up in, in North United States versus Southern United States. He gave these little kids dolls, which were black dolls, and white dolls, as to which one do you prefer. And the kids in South, they preferred white dolls. And why? Okay, because that's a nigger. So how implicit biases gets hardwired at very young age type of thing. So that was interesting. And the studies that were done with implicit bias around the world, that somewhere along the line, even along all races, 70% showed bias towards white type of thing. So, and obviously, so that's, so it's one of those things that is difficult to interpret. And all right, so this was, but that doll study was very interesting. And the gentleman who, the scientist who did this study, his name is Asaya Nango. He's a biological anthropologist, and unfortunately, I think he died just a few years ago. Okay, now this is a concept which I think maybe John wants to chime in type of thing. The difference between polymorphism was polytypy. Okay, John, do you want to talk about polymorphism?
I don't think I'm ready to do that, but I'll look into it.
Okay, yeah, so yeah, because that's this thing that, polymorphism, obviously, the same genes have manifested, sickle cell anemia, for example. I'll get to that in just a few minutes, that thing. That's polymorphism type of thing, that has taken place many times type of thing. And polytypy is defined as small set of genes that aggregate multiple traits, either due to single letter change or chunks of DNA type thing. It's called polytypy. Now, so there's polymorphism in humans, type of thing that accounts for varieties of changes that we see depending upon what region people have grown up in. And the classic example that, just to make it to go about the science, I'll have several slides coming up of sickle cell anemia, so that we'll get to in just a minute. So that's a classic example of polymorphism, as to that it's a one letter change that makes this whole disease, and that the gene has not been eliminated by natural selection. Okay, and now there are some thoughts from some of the evolutionary biologists as to, are humans polytypic? Do we have, but which is actually, that's not well accepted type of thing as to. So those are the two terms that geneticists defined. For those of you who are a lot more science based, they can get into it. And this is the book. This is one of the few books that I found which explored, how it incorporates science and as well as a race, type thing. So that was the title of the book. It's a very short book, and it's very worth reading for those who want to. He talks at each and every subjects about the skin color, medicine, ethnicity, and these things as to how the myth, so he goes over that, and at the same time, he's very biased that, yes, that we can say that, and obviously, let me jump right to it. Oh, this is the official view, which is no biological basis. Now, this was a political statement from United Nations, UNESCO agency. And that was done in the one has to put in proper perspective. This was done in the context of Holocaust. Okay. And no biological basis. Now, as a science person, I have to kind of roll up my eyes a little bit type of thing, because they haven't looked after patients with sickle cell. And obviously, sickle cell gene, we very well know it's not just confined to Africa, and it has, developed in other regions as well. But it's, and it's an interesting story that we shall get into type thing. So, and one can say this is a social construct. Now, pardon my saying so, but so is religion. Okay, we can't get rid of that myth. Okay, so to hope that yes, we'll get rid of the myth of race that easily just by kumbaya or type of thing, that is, a lot of moonshine type of thing. So, because again, as we talked about a little while ago in us versus them, we're trying to swim against, evolution that has taken place over so many years type thing, okay. And there is actually an implicit bias test that you can take, which was device type thing. It's online test that has to see, you can test yourself about the so-called implicit bias, just for sake of time, Now, this is, we can say, based on DNA analysis, that we are all same. But the man in the street sort of knows different, because they're going to be go by the appearance. And we are all visual creatures, type of thing. Okay. Now, again, that now people who are the social scientists, they would write, says, okay, this is a myth type of thing. But there's some of the biologists, including the most respected one, who are not racist by any means, okay, including the one who's at the predominance of is David Reich, who is Jewish by himself. And just to say a word or two about himself, his father was the docent or curator at the Holocaust Museum. So he has impeccable credentials. And when when he was in, obviously, he's not racist, but even then, he had written a piece in the New York Times about how to ignore some of these differences is considered taboo research, and he was picked on by so many people. But so the jury on that is out type of thing completely, as to whether there's still differences, because the point that he's trying to make, that obviously now we have become, with globalization, we have started mixing a lot more. But for, almost 7,500 years, people were segregated. Europeans did not travel to Africa, Africans did not travel to Asia. And some of the changes or the polymorphisms that have taken place may have some meanings, and we haven't explored it. And the genomic data that we have, or there is a lot of paucity of genomic data from sub-Saharan Africa and parts of Asia, that thing. And I will go into it, that the various scientists who started doing that, again, they're considered it was politically incorrect. And some of the ethicists, took an issue with them, and I'll have some more to say about it as we go along type of thing, that they were considered politically naive when they were trying to do research on small tribes, either in, South America or Papua New Guinea or other stuff. And a lot of the activists, and right, it's almost like saying, yes, I have to almost laugh that, that there was a protest from Native Americans as to you should not, send human remains to the moon, type of thing. Moon is sacred in our culture type of thing. Or, trying not to study the bones or the anthropology or paleontology that was excavated, from the land. So it was almost like the pendulum was swinging dramatically in the other direction. Okay, and you may disagree with me. So to say it's, and I think I remember reading a joke about, beauty is only skin deep. Okay, and the punchline was, what do you want, an adorable pancreas? Okay, so you can just laugh at it type of thing, or frown upon it, as you may choose, type thing. So it's so the average person, does not see DNA or does not walk around with their DNA analysis for comparison, and and with the easy availability of DNA and next generation sequences, a lot of us have spent are curious to spend $99 or whatever on ancestry.com or 23andCom to see what percentage Norwegian you are or Nigerian you are. And obviously that got a big boost since Oprah Winfrey promoted that type of thing. So, okay. So that sort of thing, the curiosity about the past, is universal, so to speak, type thing as to see where we came from. And obviously, like the joke is about, we're not all Americans or humans, but we're all hyphenated, like Irish Americans, Italian Americans, and then in Milwaukee area where I spent 30 years, had a folk festival in Milwaukee. And that's the first time that I learned that there were so many Germans, Bavarian Germans, Swabian Germans, and there were like half a dozen Germans. I'm like, okay, so, and they're like, not just Czechs, but Czechs and Bohemians. And so they were like, they had booths for all the European ethnicity. And they did a great job for the second generation. So, and just to jump onto that, type thing, one of the well-known population geneticists, did the early days of analysis of the various minorities and ethnics, and he had a statement he was Italian ancestry. Okay, his name is Luigi Sforza. He was at Stanford. And in his book, he had a statement said, well, now the Milanis have enough reason to hate the Florence people in Florence, so to speak. So there are subtle differences, when you look at some of the polymorphism that you find, type of thing. Okay, and you can just see that, like that they have serious types in India and like in Europe, between the north and right, same way, it's like in Indian subcontinents, there are a lot of stereotypes and differences that you see. And because of selective, spouse selection, the differences still have persisted, so to speak. So, and so some of these differences, are go back on various bases, as we talked about in the us versus time, not just culture, but language, religion. And after the Industrial Revolution, obviously the class and colonial expansion became a lot changed. And with the advent of slave trade, it dramatically changed and exponentially expanded, type of thing. And it continued with the discovery of migration to Australia, dramatic extent. It continued during apartheid. So there are a lot of roots all over the things. And even the mild Canadians were not above it, type of thing. I may have mentioned in some of my other classes that after the end of First World War, a ship of a lot of Indian immigrants landed in Vancouver because they were given the promise that you could settle anywhere in the British Empire. But no, they were not the right kind of immigrants. So that ship was sent back by the local people in Vancouver and had to go back to Calcutta. So even the Canadians are, and obviously those of you who haven't seen the discrimination, may enjoy a movie called Rabbit Proof Fence, that was done as to how the discrimination was carried out against the native Australians. That thing. So this is, okay, so this was enough, this thing about the worldwide perspective, and now this is, we talk about the DEI, and just for now, I think we can use for a comic interest. Kevin would be disappointed if I didn't talk about Monty Python.
Three trees, the third from the left and back a bit, that one, I reckon I could hit.
This was about equality.
The murdering blackguard! He's taken all our lupins.
Not quite.
Oh, you tricked him! Oh, you tricked him! We still have one!
Dennis Moore, riding through the night. Soon every lupin in the land will be in his mighty hand. He steals them from the rich and gives them to the poor. Mr. Moore.
I don't care if I never see another lupin till the day I die! Wasn't good you go out and steal something useful. Like what? Like gold and silver and clothes and wood and jewels.
Hang on, I'll get a piece of paper.
Okay, so he does that.
Obviously, I don't have to be that accurate. I mean, if I hit you in that sort of area, like that, when you get down to it, it's also meaningless. I've gone through that stage.
Then this more, etc., etc.
What you got for us today then?
Well, I managed to find you 4 very nice, Mr. Jenkins.
Who do you think you are, giving us poor this rubbish?
Bloody silver! What are you? And those candlesticks you got us last week, bloody 16 carat?
Yeah, why don't you go out and steal something nice, like some Phoenician silver?
Yeah, or Velasquez for the outside loo.
Stupid bitch. He's saying he steals from the poor and gives to the rich.
Wait a tick. Blimey, this redistribution of wealth is trickier than I thought.
Oh, I never did like that kind of person.
Okay, so I think, so this is, this should make, I think we were talking about equality. So it's trickier than I thought. So I just thought that would be a good clip to increase. So diversity, equality, So, and just to talk about diversity, there was a paper written by a relatively enthusiastic researcher, I think it was Chinese or Korean, at the University of Chicago. And he looked at the genetic profiling of Asians, whites, and blacks, and talked about the differences in intelligence type of thing. And then his paper was, probably there was some hasty conclusion that was drawn type of thing. And so it was like, oh, well, he's trying to promote, he's against, he's racist, and he had to drop doing the research type of thing. And the field of intelligence and genetics and heredity has been frowned upon, that no researcher, it's kind of almost like a career draining move nowadays, so much so that there is a well-known researcher, who has done a lot of work, type of thing on his guy named Robert Plomin. He's trying to find out the hereditary basis of intelligence. And he had to give up working in the United States, and I think he's working in Cambridge or something. He is American by, born and raised, but still he had to move his lab to UK because that was considered a big no-no in the United States. And obviously, that has ramifications dating back to the bell curve, which we'll talk about, as we go along, type of thing. So this is the thing, that how, diversity and this thing, it becomes a big political football, and people, and this has a lot to do with getting your funding and researching subjects that are considered socially unacceptable. Okay, now a little bit of science. I think, we can't just talk about history and politics and weird Monty Pythons. Okay, the classic example of it, is like, as I'm sure the physicians amongst you have looked after patients with sickle cell, which is the prototype of not quite race, but ethnicity, as to where your ancestors were from, whether you're from, like Arab or South India or African majority. That was the classic example, I think so. And this was, the history of sickle cell is interesting. It's rare amongst Caucasians, okay, about 1 in 2,000 to 1 in 10,000. In African American population, about 8% of people carry the gene for sickle cell traits. There's a difference between trace and the disease. If you have 2 copies, you got the disease. If you got 1 copy, usually you can live with it. You may not even know about it. But now there is testing that is done. And there's an interesting story about it. First, the disease became but known, okay, in 1910, okay, that a grad student from Africa had died due to pneumonia. And when they started looking at his blood cells, instead of being a round circle like that, they were crescent shaped like this. And so it looked like a sickle. I think now red blood cell, as most of you know, don't have nucleus, but their shape was different. And then later on, that James Herrick, had associated with varieties of infections and the pain and other symptoms that would go wrong. So the disease was, came to the forefront of that. And it's a prototype of molecular biology. Linus Pauling described it as a molecular, molecular basis of sickle cell. So he gets the credit for it, that thing. And some of the crystallography of the hemoglobin was also established. That was I'll talk about it more when we talk about the Nobel lecture, the second series of lectures that I'm going to give about Royal Society and Nobel laureates. And that a very brilliant crystallographer named Dorothy Hodgkins got the prize for determining the crystallography of hemoglobin. Not just, that's a standard hemoglobin, which has 4 chains type of thing, alpha and beta, and that is where the mutation takes place. And so the lack of oxygen makes now the biggest advantage as to why this bad gene has not been eliminated by natural selection, because it gives you some protections against malaria. Malaria parasite is an extremely complicated life cycle. It goes around from the mosquito to the bites and grows into varieties of this is not a parasitology class, so I'm not going into it, but it's a very complicated cycle. That's why it has been very difficult. One can eliminate a staphylococcus, because that's a bacteria, but parasites are trickier, and the efforts at developing vaccine against malaria has had a mixed success. There is some recent data that the vaccine may be at least 60% or 70% effective, but that's still, and it's going through phase 2 trials. Okay, but I'm digressing. But there is some protection that gives you against malaria. So that's why the gene and the mutation has taken place in different regions. Different mutations have taken place. There's an interesting story about it, and as to how race and this thing come about. In 2006, an college athlete died after vigorous exercise, I think somewhere in Texas type thing. And obviously, the university was sued for it type of thing. And they decided that they will do testing for all the people who have self-identified as African Americans. Okay, and they'll do the testing. Okay, well, not a bad enough idea. Okay, type of thing. But learned varieties of very scholarly people, including the members of the American Hematological Society, okay, wrote letters and started campaign. This would target discrimination. Okay, so this would target people through discrimination. So instead of just testing people, it was everybody who's a college athlete is now checked for it. So it is a universal testing for college athletics has been instituted type of thing. And now, if you do that cost-effective analysis, we have raised from $6,000 to $30,000 by adding, okay. And this dragged on. Even one has to give credit to President Nixon, who had initiative for doing testing for sickle cell disease. This was because there was no advocacy group for sickle cell testing, just like Jerry Lewis took muscular dystrophy for telethon. So it took until 70s, and Nixon did sign an initiative, but that was dragged on by the Congress. Finally, during the George Bush's era, that became mandatory for testing for newborns. Okay, and similarly, so that there is a testing type of thing. Now, based on that, obviously, I think all of you are okay, let me just jump onto the other side. I'll get back to it. This is the big discovery of our announcement of this year about the gene therapy that even made 60 Minutes about the gene therapy for sickle cell disease, which is at a cost of, a couple of $1 million per case type of thing. So, and there are varieties of approaches for gene therapies type of thing. So gene addition, adding the new gene with a viral vector, gene editing with CRISPR, and these are the varieties of methods of gene editing type thing. So, but I think this, so how the gene can be modified. And there was a first successful case of a woman named, I don't remember her last name, the name Victoria, who was interviewed on 60 Minutes type of thing. And so that's a big success story of CRISPR and this thing. But one can look at how many people are going to be able to actually afford it type of thing. Okay. Now, taking a page book from, if the genetic testing is there, so if you do counseling before getting married or having children, that would be an easier way to reduce the sickle cell disease burden. But that is a goal that is not easily pursued type of thing. Okay, so they know, because we are, instead of doing, we're taking fancy to our, our highly expensive therapy. But the easiest way to reduce the burden of the disease would be to do with genetic counseling and reproductive responsibility type of thing, to make sure that and we'll talk more about it when we talk about the Jewish community and the prevalence of genetic diseases, so that, they do exemplary job. Sorry, let me address the chat. A big problem is the channel tunnel enables the French to invade. Yes. Okay. I won't get into the Anglo-French controversy type of thing. So, okay, I'm trying to read this thing. John's comment. Sorry, I think okay, yeah, Lorraine, yeah, okay, I got this. Thank you, Lorraine. I'll send you the lecture notes. Okay, so these are some of the testing, the newborn testing. Finally was after 40 years, it was made mandatory testing. So, okay, and now one part I missed was I'll go back. Why this slide? Does everybody recognize this movie?
That
So
looks a lot
do
like
with the
Hannibal
lambs.
Lecter, of course.
Silence of the Lamb. Yes, Anthony Hopkins. Yeah, that's it. It was the gory movie starring Jodie Foster. Why did I put this slide? Because he takes a statement about, I'll eat the liver of this doctor who is coming, the psychiatrist who is coming with a bottle of Chianti and fava beans. Okay, now, why is fava beans important? Okay, now most of you, in the United States, would know about it, but I think unless you're a physician, you may not have heard too much about the G6PD deficiency. It's now G6PD, so that was this was hammered on to us in our medical school as a glucose 6 phosphate dehydrogenase. Okay, so that's a recessive, sex-linked trait which is inherited. Okay, and that can, if you eat fava beans, the protein inside the thing, that can cause hemolytic crisis. Means you're all of a sudden you become anemic, your spleen gets damaged type of thing. So that's called favism. So and also that's not just the fava beans, but varieties of other medications, such as some various antibiotics and other stuff, can cause this type of hemolytic crisis where your blood cells break down type thing. So there are certain glucosides inside the beans, inside the fava beans, can cause this. It can, all of a sudden you get a reaction after eating your beans. You get sick, become pale, jaundice, dark urine. So this can be really a massive hemolytic, means your blood cells break down. Okay, so that can be of this thing. So this was hammered onto it, that be careful about the G6PD deficiency type thing. So there's a test that can be done for that. So that's a very common this thing. So how genetics and ethnicity comes into it. And it's also common not just in India but also in people of Mediterranean ancestry, Arabs. So it's the whole bit. Again, gives you some protections against malaria. So it is easy to dismiss race as a social construct, but it definitely has a health significance. that's the point I wanted to emphasize, that yes, it may be quote unquote the color alone is not, but there is some, okay, because otherwise, we'll be throwing away all this pharmacogenetics that is being type things. So we already talked about Dorothy Hodgkins and these things and the mutations and the malaria link. So this is the, like a prime example of the polymorphism, ethnicity. I won't use the word race, but as to where your ancestors were from and how isolated they were for at least say 7,500 years, perhaps, okay, as we talked about, until Vasco da Gama, or until that travel around Cape of Good Hope. Most of the northern Europeans did not go to Africa in the same way. The Africans did not come and mix with the Native Americans and so on and so forth. Okay, so it's a different this thing. So human evolution is not just a branching tree, it's like that overgrown tree, because obviously, because I think one thing one has to say, okay, Darwin talked about the tree of life, originally in his classic works, but it's more of a thicket type of thing, so our ancestors, yeah, like to mix it up, they were a horny bunch, to put pardon my expression, so because that is obviously, there was this big belief, back in when the first Neanderthal skeletons were discovered, that there was no mixing, but especially except for Africans, uh, all of us have Neanderthal genes. I did my 23andMe, and it has only I have like 3% of Neanderthal gene. My wife thinks it's 97%, but that who am I to argue? Okay, so they took place, and the same way, Denisovian mix that is there in the Asians. And this is another way of elaborating migration that took place, type of thing. So it's a varieties of. So it's, we were, so if we had to give our ancestors a surname or type of thing, the Walker would be the most appropriate. I would vote for Walkers, because in a relatively short span, like 40,000 years after Africa, we had managed walking around the small groups at trial, because obviously there was a land bridge across the Malay Peninsula. So we reached all the way to Australia, and later on with the land bridge, across Margaret to the New World. So we did get around, at the same time type thing. So, okay, so, and again, there's been a lot of data every week that you find us new information about the influence of Neanderthal genes, that is still apparent in a positive or negative way. Some of the genes that we may have inherited from Neanderthal have got to do with your immunity, type 2 diabetes, your nose shape in some people hair color, depression, your hypercoagulation, and even things such as early risers, okay, and even tobacco addiction, So as to how, now one has to take that with a grain of salt, perhaps, to some extent, but there is a lot of influence of the inbreeding that took place, thousands and thousands of years ago. Okay, so how genetics and even other species introgression, as it is called, has had an influence type of thing. Okay. Oh, okay, I see. Okay, and obviously, and this is the some of you may recognize him. That is Svante Pääbo. He was the Nobel laureate who did the DNA, ancient DNA analysis of Neanderthals, and I think in 2017 or 18 he was the sole Nobel winner type thing. So I'll have more to say about him if for those of you who are coming to the Nobel Prize class type thing. So he's okay. I'll just preempt you type thing. There are very few father and son Nobel Prize winners, and he is one of them. Except that he did not know his father until he was 40 years old. His father, who is a Nobel laureate, had a child out of wedlock, and he finally discovered that his father was also a Nobel laureate. So those of you who don't think that heredity has a role in intelligence can look at him type of thing. Okay, anyway, enough kidding about type of thing. But he's the man who did this thing. So there was some. Uh, he is a Finn, I think, with Svante Pabo, but he's the head of the Max Planck Institute, which is a very a powerful institute for genetic and bioinformatics analysis in Germany, and then later on they went on to do the uh, analysis of ancient DNA from Denisovians, from a little pinky finger type thing. So that was the whole totally new discovery of the third tribe, which again, has the admixture with the Asian population and including the Tibetan population. So I have several slides separately about the genes and various regional this thing. So we'll have as we go along, we shall have more to talk about. Okay, and mixed blood in the form of Rome. So now there are varieties of, obviously, those of you who are better read than I am have read The Decline and Fall of Roman Empire. And this is one of the many hypotheses for decline and fall of Roman Empire. Roman was a melting pot and was blamed on, mixing and expanding too much and type of thing. And that is being, now touted as a warning from America. Okay, and there's a Latin word which was given for it, cloaca genitum, sewer of people type thing. So again, now this I just discovered this yesterday type thing. So this is an interesting analysis.
Biology and genetics at Stanford University.
I'm Hannah Moots. I'm a PhD student at Stanford in anthropology, and I've been lucky enough to work on this project where we've looked at ancient DNA from 29 different sites in and around Rome. That's 127 individuals spanning the last 12,000 years.
And in particular, we were interested in understanding the shifts in the population during the historical period, during the Roman Empire. We found that there were tremendous amounts of immigration into Rome during the historical period, and that these reflected in many cases political alliances of Rome with other parts of Europe and the Mediterranean.
So according to myth, Rome was founded in the Iron Age in around 753 BCE by the twins Romulus and Remus. In this period, Rome was a small city-state, like many of its neighbors in central Italy. But in the next centuries, it starts to grow, first across the Italian peninsula, and then it starts to expand across the Mediterranean to North Africa, other parts of Europe, and the Near East.
So one of the most interesting things that we see is that during the first century CE, which is really the heart of the imperial period, we see at that time that there's a huge amount of immigration that's coming into Rome, mainly from the Near East, coming either directly or indirectly. And that's enough to actually shift the average ancestry of people who are living in Rome to look much more Eastern at that time.
We get to late antiquity, and this period is characterized by a lot of political change. The Roman Empire starts to fall apart. It breaks into an eastern and a western half. The capital moves from Rome to Constantinople. And what we're seeing genetically actually reflects some of these shifts, which is interesting. So we see sort of shift away from Near Eastern ancestry, and we see more individuals who are living in Rome with ancestry from Western and Northern Europe.
One thing that's really striking to me is how much immigration there was at different times from different places, so that the genetic makeup of the population is shifting significantly from time to time over periods of just a few centuries. And then secondly, starting from almost 3,000 years ago, Rome was already a very cosmopolitan place. So living side by side in the same population are people who have ancestry from quite different places, including from Europe, from North Africa, from the Near East, and even within time periods there's a lot of mixing of different kinds of people. So it's kind of like the Rome was a melting pot, even going back very far into the past.
Okay, so that gives you some insight as to what somebody probably in another 2,005 years will do a similar study on New York or United States for that matter. Okay, because as I talked about in one of our Saturday socials, that 20% of marriages are mixed race in the United States now. So we are seeing some dramatic shift in the genetic buildup of not just United States, but even in other more traditional countries type of thing, as to because in my extended family, there are people who have married, people from south or north type of thing, which would have been unheard of even as recently as 40 years ago. Okay. So I think we already talked about type of thing. So I think, we're a little bit behind time type of thing, but I should probably stop here. We're reaching to the noon witching hour. And I think no, hopefully I'll stop here. And I think if Al wants to stop the recording, and I may not cover all the slides I have, but at least, hopefully this has been of interest to most of you. Okay, and if you have any other suggestions as to how to format this class, please, as Kevin talked about at the break time, please send me an email type of thing so we can modify as we go along.